Soft and Spiraling. This is now the official episode 2. There was an unofficial episode 2, but this is the official episode 2. And the topic that we're going to talk about today was actually by request of my dad. My dad listens to every episode of the podcast. Thank you, Dad. Love you. Great fan. He has requested that I talk about why am I still an alcohol-free person 4 years into this decision? Like, what about my life keeps me on the path and the journey of an alcohol-free lifestyle? And now that I've taken the time to really think about it, I see just how much being a highly sensitive person and also choosing an alcohol-free life, just how much those two things correlate to one another. And it didn't dawn on me for a while, but I totally see how those two things affect one another. So if we're going to talk about how and why I'm still an alcohol-free person 4 years into this decision, I think it only makes sense to really tell the story, the backstory of my relationship with alcohol and what it was like during the beginning, middle, and end of my drinking career. I think that's really going to set the foundation and have, you know, my reality and my day in the life now to make sense, is if I first tell the story from the very beginning. It's been quite a long time since I've told this story. I used to tell it all the time, especially during my first year of sobriety, like my first year of alcohol-free life. But it's been a while since I've spoken about it, so I'm hoping I don't leave anything out. Why am I nervous? I used to talk about this all the time, especially on TikTok. I had no shame to speak about this, so I'm not really sure where these nerves are coming from, but it's probably just because it's been a while. So when did I start drinking? I started drinking in high school. I was a freshman in high school, to be specific, so I must have been around either 14 or 15 years old. I don't know if that's going to sound young for people or if that's going to sound normal. I feel as though where I come from, yes, it's too early to start drinking, that is for sure. But I also think that it's not abnormal or atypical for high school kids to drink. That was, at least to me, that felt very much the norm. Another thing is, when I think about my drinking career, I sort of see it as like a relationship. There was like the beginning stages, some may say even like the honeymoon phase of drinking, which would then transform into like this sort of middle area that lasted a few years, and then eventually we will talk about the end. First, the honeymoon phase. I remember the first night that I drank. I was at a friend's house of mine. He was a guy that was in my grade, and I was there with some of his friends, some of my friends, my girlfriends, who I've been friends with for a really, really long time. I remember we were drinking this like honestly really gross type of vodka. It was like neon blue. It was called UV blue, and we were mixing it with Sprite, and we were drinking out of red Solo cups. Like we're in like the basement of our friend's place, and that's what we're drinking. We're listening to music, setting the scene. It's not a huge party. It's a very small little like friends get together. And I would honestly say this night was pretty innocent and it was fun. I think I only drank maybe 1 or 2 drinks. And that was enough for me to feel the effects of the alcohol. I was such a teeny tiny little thing when I was a freshman in high school. So of course it didn't take much for me to feel tipsy. And I just remember, you know, joking around, laughing a lot. Maybe we were like dancing to the music, me and my girlfriends. It was overall a good a good time. You know, nothing really bad happened. Nothing got out of hand. I made it home completely safe. I'm pretty sure my girlfriends slept over at my place that night. And although we definitely should not have been drinking, and if my mom knew that we had been drinking, she would have been pissed, rightfully so. I was a kid, like so young. It's not good for you, right? But just to set the scene and for you guys to get the vibe, it was quite innocent. And we were just excited to be doing something new. It kind of made us feel like we were a bit more grown, I think, by drinking, because alcohol is more of an adult thing to do. And yeah, when you're like 14, 15, 16, when you're a teenager, like you want to be grown, or at least I did. I wanted to be grown. I wanted to have independence. You're getting, you're freshly out of your childhood, but there's still a lot of parts of your life that feel like childhood. So it's like, it's this transition period. I also remember when we were drinking is I did get this like sense of confidence, and like I didn't have any like shame or shyness or embarrassment about me. And me and my friends, and I think a lot of other people in the States would call this, I'm using air quotes now, liquid courage. It's like when you drink, you get this courage and confidence about you that you may not have when you're sober. That's just the way that's the way that I saw it back then. And I would say that honeymoon phase lasted for years, like that lasted for quite a long time. But as my high school career was moving on and I, entered my sophomore year, my junior year, my senior year, there were definitely aspects to my relationship with drinking that I started to not like. It was as if the honeymoon phase was sort of starting to fade. I was taking off the rose-colored glasses. That's what we say when you're like I'm talking like specifically with a relationship, like when you take off the rose-colored glasses is when you start to see the person that you're in a relationship with as a human, as a person that has good things and bad things about them. And you see that they are not this flawless, perfect human being, because none of us are. We are all flawed, and we all have things that are not, that are great and that are not so great. So I started to realize that drinking has negative side effects to it. And I'll just give some examples. First thing being the hangover. I started to get hangovers when it was like my later part of my high school career. And also another thing is like I'm not drinking every weekend when I'm in high school. And if I am drinking on a weekend, maybe it's like one of the nights of the weekend. It's not both. So that's another detail that I just wanted to mention during this era of my drinking career. But yeah, I started to get those hangovers, which of course, hangovers do not feel good. For me, a hangover meant definitely a headache, nausea, stomach ache, fatigue, feeling very lazy and not motivated, just wanting time to recover. But I am still quite young during this time. I'm like 17 years old-ish. So it's not like it's taking up my whole day. Maybe it's ruining my morning, but I still have, plenty of hours in the day to feel okay and to feel good. And maybe it's simply like me taking, a low dose of an ibuprofen and that was enough to make me feel better. Some other aspects that I noticed that I didn't really love about drinking and about just how I am as a tipsy or drunk person is I had a tendency of maybe oversharing. So I would be saying things that, maybe I would regret saying later. Another thing is I would do things that maybe I would regret later. It would be like I was making decisions that I wouldn't have made if I was in a sober state of mind. So instead, what I'm more so thinking in my head now is like, I should just be better about moderating so that things, stay in control. I can still keep drinking, but maybe I should, focus on not over drinking so that I don't make decisions that I don't mean to make. Now, this stage of like the honeymoon phase sort of coming to an end, seeing the negatives, but also definitely still understanding like the way that I saw it back then was the positives of like, I like going out, I like having fun, I like letting loose and being relaxed during the weekend because school is stressful and it's a lot of responsibility. So to be able to like let go, I was willing to experience the negative side effects of alcohol because I felt as though the positives were outweighing them. I hope that is clear and makes sense. And this phase would last again for quite a few years. I would say like into college, but there was a shift once I moved to college because I'm not living at home anymore. I'm living in my first year as a freshman in college I was living in a dorm. So it's just not the same, my sense of home dynamic is completely different. I'm living with, one other person who is my age in my dorm room. My mom's not there, my dad's not there. And so I have more freedom. And as I'm sure a lot of people already know, drinking culture is a huge part of the college experience in the States. I think that's the case for most colleges. I would be, pretty confident in saying most colleges. And where I went, my college was no exception to that. It was definitely a huge part of going to school. Now, I will say, as time was going on, I was realizing just how bad the consequences of alcohol could be. Me thinking back and remembering, there was one experience that I had, and this was even before college. This was at the very end of my senior year of high school, where I got too drunk, and I had a blackout. A blackout is when you drink so much that you don't remember parts of your night or, maybe all of your night, and you wake up and you don't really understand what happened because you overdrank. And that situation happened to me at the very end of my senior year of high school, and it really had a huge effect on me because I still remember how horrible I felt after that night. And I especially felt horrible because I made a decision that really hurt a friend of mine, and that was very horrible. It was just awful to have known that I hurt the feelings of someone who I loved. And the thing about it is, even with that experience and going into college, I would continue to have nights like that. I would continue to overdrink to the point that I wouldn't remember what happened. And the thing about it is, I was often told, like, yeah, this happens to everybody sometimes. Everyone overdrinks sometimes. Everyone overshares sometimes. Everyone does stupid things when they're drunk. It's just part of it. It's, it comes with the territory. Like, if you're going to drink you run the risk of having nights where you overdo it. So now this is sort of like I see it as the third phase of my relationship with alcohol. First was the honeymoon phase. Afterwards was when the honeymoon phase ended, but I'm still seeing the positives of drinking and they're not outweighing the negative aspects. But now that we're in the third phase, I'm realizing that alcohol and I are maybe not the best fit. We might not be the best fit, but it's also not totally the worst combination of two things. So although alcohol and I might not be perfect for each other, we can probably still make it work. And I feel like this is kind of like I'm starting to be a bit in denial. And I'm trying to convince myself that my drinking habits are okay because I'm only drinking on the weekends. This is true for the most part. There were some like traditions and things in college of Thirsty Thursday, Wine Wednesday, but that wasn't like an every week thing. For argument's sake, I was mostly a weekend only drinker. So I'm not drinking every day. I'm still going to class. I'm still going to work. I always worked part-time when I was in college. And I do not feel as though I have an addictive relationship with alcohol. It's not like I'm waking up the next day and feeling as though I need to reach for alcohol. Usually if it was a night that I felt like I overdid it and I wake up the next day, I'm like, no, I'm going to take a break from drinking tonight. So I was giving my body breaks. And so I think that was helping me convince myself that everything was still under control. It wasn't an out of control situation, even though sometimes I did get out of control. I graduated college and I would end up moving back to Chicago, where I'm from, because I went to college a state over. So I was like about 3 hours away from Chicago. I would say the drinking habits that I had pretty much followed me into the phase of graduating, like post college life. But the thing about it is I really didn't know in which direction my life was going at that time. I didn't know if I wanted to actually work in the field that I got my degree in. And I was feeling a bit lost and like I didn't have a lot of direction during this part of my life. So I still needed to make money, though. I got an apartment with one of my very, very best friends. She's still one of my very, very best friends. So we needed to, pay rent and utilities, and I had a car. So I needed to, pay for insurance and gas and whatnot. So I needed to make money. And something that I always did as a part-time job throughout high school and college was working as a server. I was working as a waitress in the service industry. And so that's what I did. I found a job as a server in the city of Chicago, like extremely close to where I lived. And by extremely close, I mean I lived in the apartment on top of the bar that I was working at, the bar restaurant that I was working at. Now, during this era of my life, my drinking habits sort of shifted because I was working mostly on the weekends. The weekends and the nights were where I was making the most money as a server. I was kind of working like the opposite as like your typical 9 to 5. With being in the service industry, I mean, alcohol is just everywhere. It's extremely accessible to get alcohol when you work in the service industry, at least in Chicago. I can only talk about from my lived perspective, my lived experience, sorry. But I think I would say that's probably pretty typical, at least like nationwide. Alcohol is just everywhere. You have access to alcohol, usually cheap alcohol as well, because when you work at a bar or a restaurant, you can get discounts when you're not working. So that's definitely the situation that I was in. And I was starting to make, a lot of friends that were also other servers or bartenders. And so alcohol was just something that I was constantly around. And I think because I was constantly around it, I was consuming it pretty often. Again, I was never an everyday drinker, but I would say that the frequency did go up in some sense during this time. My inner voice about the negative aspects of alcohol is really starting to get quite loud during this time in my life. My hangovers now were not just about the physical ailments that I was experiencing, like nausea, stomachache, headache, fatigue. I'm also feeling really, really anxious. I'm feeling super anxious during my hangovers. I'm also feeling quite depressed. It was like nothing I could do was really helping my mood if I was quite hungover. And another thing on top of that is these symptoms of like hangxiety, so not just the physical hangover, but like the mental tax that it had on me, it was not lasting just one day. It was lasting like 2, maybe 3 days. And now looking back on it, that's kind of what I meant by the beginning of the episode is I have always been a highly sensitive person my entire life. And I think I wasn't realizing just how much fuel I was adding to that fire by drinking. I already feel things very, very deeply with a sober mind. So adding something that was intoxicating me, yeah, those effects were also heightened for me. And my thoughts exactly during these episodes of hangxiety were, I was really, really hard on myself. I was really speaking to myself in a very, very negative way. I would maybe go so far as to say I had self-hatred towards myself of like, why did you say that? Why did you do that? You're so embarrassing. You should be ashamed of yourself. Yes, of course you should feel guilty. And to be completely fair, I was making decisions that I should feel shameful about. I was saying things that I did not mean to say. I think I was quite hurtful to the people that were closest to me during this era of my life. And this is before I entered therapy. This was before I was really diving deep into those wounds that I spoke about during the first episode that I carried from my childhood into my adulthood. I had not even scratched the surface of starting to look at those parts of me, but the sadness and the anger was there. And I think when I drank, I was unable to suppress those things. Those things really started to come to the surface. And when I was tipsy or drunk, I was even more emotional reactive than how I am when I'm sober. If something made me sad, I was instantly crying. If something made me angry, I was instantly ready to start an argument with someone. I didn't have like a filter. I didn't have any line that I couldn't cross. And that resulted in me hurting friends, hurting family, hurting, people that I was interested in having a relationship with, but I was in no state of mind to be in a committed relationship. That was always something that I wanted and that I strived for. But yeah, definitely looking back, like I was in no state of mind to be in a relationship during this time. I spoke about in my first episode that there was a summer that I had an internship, and I eventually stopped going to this internship, and that was sort of like my alarm going off in my head, like something is really wrong and I need to seek help. I need to help myself because this is not like me. I'm a very dedicated and hard worker in a student sense and in a working sense, and for me to not show up for my internship, yeah, I just knew something was really, really wrong. Like I said, I entered therapy, and then that's when the self-reflection really started. It wasn't immediate. It definitely was not immediate. I was in therapy for maybe, a couple years before I started to connect the dots of, I don't know if alcohol is really serving me anymore. I think that alcohol might be really hindering my progress in life. During those first 2 years of therapy, I would make quite the career change. I no longer wanted to be working in the service industry anymore. I wanted to be on a 9 to 5, more so like a 9 to 5 schedule. I wanted to be putting money into a retirement fund. I wanted to be more financially stable. So I made a career change sometime, I can't remember exactly, but during those first 2 years of therapy. And when I made that career change, again, my relationship with alcohol sort of changed and shifted. I was working Monday through Friday, so the whole being around alcohol so often, no matter what day of the week it was, how it was when I was a server, that dramatically changed because I needed to be up at 6 or 7 in the morning, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I really wasn't partying, wasn't drinking besides the weekend. That became very strict once I started at my new job. So I'm still, it's a slow progression of me realizing like, okay, I'm in a better spot financially and career-wise. I'm going to therapy. I feel like I'm making strides and I'm looking at parts of myself that I really needed to look at and identify that I wanted to change. I'm caring about my health. I'm working out consistently, and I'm realizing how important it is to eat well and balanced. Self-care just became, more of my norm. But something that I noticed was on Sundays after the weekend, I was still feeling really, really bad. And I was on Sundays, especially, were the hardest days of my week because I was usually hungover in some sense. And this was even like if I was having 1 or 2 drinks on a Saturday night, I was still experiencing like pretty intense physical hangovers and the mental anxiety. I was experiencing that very deeply as well. And yeah, I think that has to do with the fact that I'm highly sensitive. It was like even small amounts of alcohol were affecting me greatly. Around my, it must have been around my 26th birthday was when I wanted to sort of change my relationship with alcohol. And I didn't know exactly what that looked like. My birthday is in July. And I remember in like September or October after my 26th birthday was when I first tried a 30-day break. I just wanted to do a 30-day break from alcohol, and I just wanted to see if it affected the way that I felt, how it was going to affect the way that I felt. And to be completely honest, that 30 days, that changed my life. It would go on to change my life. And that's not to say that I didn't go back to drinking. I did. I did go back to drinking. I did the 30 days. I was very committed. I was super strict with myself, and I did not drink a drop of alcohol. And how much better I felt on Sunday was every Sunday of that 30 days. I mean, it was so miraculous. And I felt like I had so much more time on the weekend to do the things that I wanted to do. I was still productive on Sundays. I didn't have Sunday scaries anymore. I don't know if Sunday scaries is a term in Europe, so I'm going to explain what those are. It's basically like when you're so afraid and anxious about how the work week is going to go, it ruins your Sunday's mood. Even though it's still the weekend and you still have the whole day to enjoy a day without work, you are so concerned about what's about to happen in the work week that, yeah, your Sunday is just shot. Didn't have the Sunday scaries anymore, felt more productive, felt so much more emotionally stable. Obviously wasn't, oversharing, saying things I didn't mean to say, doing things I didn't mean to do, because I was always in this sober state of mind. So I did the 30-day break, but I know that right around the end of the 30 days, I was going on a vacation with my friends, and I would drink during that vacation. And unfortunately, there was one night of that vacation where I really overdrank, and I was back to feeling immediately like the way that I felt before. I remember also sort of thinking like this 30-day break was going to cure my relationship with alcohol. I was going to be able to return back to drinking in this whole new way, and I was going to be able to moderate more than ever, and it was going to be completely different than what it was before. But that's not what ended up happening. It was pretty similar. Then just like maybe 1 or 2 weeks later was Halloween of that year. And if you guys follow me on Instagram, you know that October 31st of 2021 was the day that I woke up, and I did drink the night before because it was a Saturday and we were celebrating Halloween. Although I went out and drank and partied, I didn't overdrink. I didn't overparty. Nothing dramatic happened. I just woke up October 31st of 2021 and I just knew alcohol can no longer be a part of my life anymore. I don't want it to be. I don't want to feel this feeling anymore. I don't want to dedicate more time and energy and, just like so much negative emotion, crying and anxiety and depression. I didn't want to experience that anymore at the fault of me deciding to drink, because that's a choice, I know that now that anxiety and feelings of depression can happen anyways, but it was like me drinking was guaranteeing that I was going to feel that. It wasn't just like I'm going through a tough time in my life, as we all do. It was like, no, I'm making the choice to drink, which means I'm going to have to suffer the consequences. And yeah, it just eventually got to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. And I stopped. And I never went back, which is just crazy to think about, because so much in my life has changed from back then to now. What I thought my life was going to end up like and be on October 31st of 2021 is completely different to what it actually is now. I mean, I live in a different country, on a different continent. I have a different job, and my whole lifestyle is completely different. But keeping alcohol out of my life has been consistent, and I know for a fact it's because that is what is best for me. Now, there is this phenomenon that is sort of spoken about in the sober space, especially online, that when you first decide to stop drinking, you can experience something that's called the pink cloud. The pink cloud is like you are really experiencing and feeling the benefits of sober life. And you're realizing, how much time it gives you back to yourself. And for me, I became really inspired to talk about sobriety as a young person. And I was feeling very creative. I had all of these creative ideas, and that's when I first started my TikTok. That's when Blazik and I first started the Young, Fun, and Sober podcast. I was going on other people's podcasts as a guest. I had created an Etsy shop for press-on nails, which I loved to do. And it was actually, for a minute there, quite successful. I had all of these ideas and I just wanted to share them with the world. And it was really a cool thing to experience my pink cloud. That lasted, quite a long time, but like everything, all good things must come to an end. And I remember, sort of after I broke up with alcohol, if we're going to go back to sort of the relationship metaphor, I went through the pink cloud and I had this, huge sense of relief, and I knew I was making the right decision because I could feel it. I could feel it in my bones. But that doesn't mean that I was an exception to regret. There were moments that happened, and that even still happen now, that it's really hard to stay dedicated to my decision to not drink, because especially as a young person, you can feel really isolated and you can feel really lonely and you can feel really othered by being the only person in the room that's not drinking. I felt like there was quite a stigma around, being the only person not drinking. That's why my original TikTok handle was that one sober friend, because I really felt like that one sober friend, like I was the token sober friend in the group. And although like 90% of the time I was really proud of that and I was really proud of my decision, there was that 10% that you don't want to be different. You don't want to feel othered and like you're different from everybody else. Sometimes you just want to be part of the crowd. And alcohol, for me, it did give me a sense of belonging for many years of my life. Now I look back and I see it was sort of like a false sense of belonging. It wasn't actually authentic and genuine and true, but humans crave connection. We always have and we always will. It's part of the way that we are built and wired. And what I, then came to realize, a bit later, was I needed to find that sort of connection and sense of belonging, but in sober spaces. And so what was really, really great about Chicago is I was able to find that really easy. Living in as big of a city as Chicago, it was surprisingly quite easy for me to find sober spaces where I could speak to other sober people, and they became really, really good friends of mine, and I still am in contact with them. And now that I'll be going home for Christmas pretty soon for 3 weeks, yay, I'll be able to go and see some of them, which just makes me, I'm just so thrilled about that. But yeah, before that happened, it was hard to not look back on my relationship with alcohol and sort of, romanticize and idealize the benefits I'm using air quotes, like the positives that I saw of alcohol, because I think that happens even when you go through a breakup with a person. Like, you will have moments of regret of like, am I doing the right thing? Is this really what is best for me? Did I just give up, the love of my life? Those thoughts totally go through people's minds. But I'm glad that I was able to work through, I would say, like, those really intense feelings of regret happen most during the first year of me not drinking. As I said before, I do still have them occasionally now, but it's not nearly as frequent. It's very, very, very occasional. So I would just say now, to answer the original question that my dad wanted me to answer for this episode, is I no longer see my relationship with alcohol as the good outweighing the bad. That's just simply not what it ended up being. The negative consequences that I had to pay in order to keep alcohol in my life were and are not something that I'm willing to allow myself to live through. I would rather have my mental health in a space that feels good for me, where I feel in control of my behavior and in control of what I say and what I do, and my progress and my healing in life is so much more important than a Saturday night where I'm drinking. I am willing to pay that price of the Saturday night if it means the rest of my week I'm in, a mentally stable space. Now, as you guys know, from my catch-up episode, I'm not immune to darkness. I'm not immune to hard obstacles in life. Yeah, when I moved across the world, I entered, a very dark season of my life. But what I also knew was the only thing that could really make it worse and make it even more dark than it already was if I was still drinking. So even though I went through that really, really tough first year of being here, I did it with a sober mind. And I think I was able to overcome it as quickly as I did because I'm alcohol free and because I prioritize my mental and my physical health, unlike I did before when I was drinking. And I've also just realized that I can find community and connection with people as a sober person, and those connections that I make with people are really, really quite strong because I'm always going into these interactions with, my sober brain, with my authentic and genuine self. I'm not clouded or different, like a different version of Julia. I always just show up as me. And sometimes that's me being quite shy. Sometimes that's me being quite awkward. But if I'm truly meant to connect with another human being, it doesn't matter that I'm shy in the beginning. It doesn't matter that I'm timid. It doesn't matter that I'm awkward. If that person is meant to be in my life, it's not going to matter. My sober brain is enough for me to identify that I have a connection with this other person. There's so many benefits I can talk about when it comes to my alcohol-free life. I do want to keep this episode not super super long. I think it's going to be the longest episode that I've had, because I can really talk about this topic quite in depth. But then the last thing I will say is, although I really lost my sense of confidence when I moved here, I'm slowly getting back to the place that I was before I moved. And my confidence was at an all-time high in Chicago before I moved. And I have no doubt that I will get back to that place, sooner rather than later. And that's also thanks to my dedication and my commitment to living an alcohol-free life. So I hope this was insightful. I know I spoke more about, my alcohol journey versus being specifically highly sensitive. But if you have any questions about how those two things really show up and correlate in my life, I would love to hear them. I just think it's important that I tell this story because it's really, really a huge part of who I am. And I don't know where I would be if I was still drinking. I do not think, I know I would be in a way worse situation. And my life is like, I'm thriving, I have so much going for me. I feel so lucky and grateful to have all the things going for me. I spoke about before that how much I love, my job, and the fact that, my partner and I, we live in Europe, and we live in a safe city, and we're able to travel to really cool and amazing places. I'm meeting a lot of amazing people. I miss my friends and family in Chicago, of course I do. But actually in the next episode, I'm going to talk about how my relationships have really shifted since moving abroad. And yes, there's, negative aspects to that, but there's actually surprisingly a lot of positive effects that I've seen on my move abroad with my friends and family. So I did not mean for that to be a segue, but it kind of just naturally happened. So you can look forward to that. But yeah, everything ties back to my sensitivity. Everything ties back to my emotions and the way that I see and feel the world. So it's all very well connected. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something, or maybe something that I said was thought-provoking, but just thank you so much for listening. Please do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, or to give the podcast a follow on Spotify. I would really, really greatly appreciate it. Also likes, also comments are very appreciated, and 5-star reviews. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.
You're a star. The camera loves you.